BochieKnot and BochieKnot.com. My name is Nicole. For those of you who don't know, in this channel you will find everything related to macrame, from DIY tutorials to tips and tricks videos. You should be able to find a lot of valuable macrame content right here. If you guys do enjoy this video and you do find the content valuable, please give the video a thumbs up and click that subscribe button. So in today's video, we'll be going over the second question in our macrame Q&A series. So I know the number one question that comes to mind when you're ready to start creating your own macrame designs is, how do I measure cord? So I know for me and from my own personal experience that running out of cord partway through a project or when you're almost done a project is super frustrating. Most of the time you'll try to plan out your design, but more often than not, things can change as you knot along. Your design might turn out to be something totally different, and that is okay. And you might end up using more cord than you had originally planned. Or there are often times where you just underestimate the total length of your piece and the amount of cord that you had needed. And that is okay. When you're creating your own designs, these things will happen. But how do we make sure that we do avoid some of these situations where we do run out of cord? I have had several projects where I've run out of cord when I was almost done a project, and it was super frustrating because sometimes you can't do anything about it and you'll have to unknot the entire thing and then start over. I know that cord is expensive, so most of the time you don't want to cut more than you need to so that you can conserve them. And so trying to find the balance between cutting too little or cutting too much is something that you will develop over time as you create more and more projects. But I do have some guidelines from my own personal experience that I want to share with you guys today so that hopefully it will help you guys out in measuring out cord for your projects. And so of course it would depend on the size of the piece that you're going to make. So I would take the length of the expected piece and I would multiply that number by 4.5 to get the length of the cord that you will need to cut. But because most of the time you will need to attach the cord onto a dowel or an object, and because you'll need to fold that cord in half, you'll need to multiply that number by 2. So the golden ratio is length times 4.5 times 2. So as you guys can imagine, this is not exactly science. Everyone knots a little differently. It depends on several factors, like the size of the cord you're using, the size of the piece, how many knots, how many different knots you're making, the tightness of the knots that you make, and so on. There are always exceptions to the rule, and the golden ratio that I had just talked about, I use that in the majority of my projects where I know I'll be using more knots in the project. About half or 3/4 of the project will be knots, and then the remainder will be fringe. So I always use the 4.5 when I know that I'll be making more knots. However, if you do know that the majority of your project is going to be fringe and you're going to have very minimal knots, then I would use 3 times or 4 times the length of the piece that you're going to make as the ratio. And contrary to that, if you're planning to have mostly knots and very minimal fringe, and you're going to make a lot of knots that take up a lot of cord, such as berry knots, then I would err on the side of caution and I would use 5 times the length as the ratio. And of course, like I said before, you would also have to multiply that by 2 if you're folding the cord in half and attaching that onto a dowel or object. If you guys are planning to use a lot of the same knots throughout a macrame piece, you can measure out cord more accurately using the following tips.
If you're planning on using a lot of the same knots throughout your pattern, say for example square knots, you can take a sample swatch of square knots and measure the length of that swatch. So what I would do is take 4 strands of cord and measure the length of each strand. Then fold each strand in half and attach them onto the dowel using a lark's head knot. Then we're going to make a series of alternating square knots until we run out of cord. So starting with the left 4 cords, we're going to make a square knot, then a square knot to the right, one in the middle underneath, and we'll keep repeating this pattern until we run out of cord. So as you can see here, this is the last row of square knots that I can make. With the length of cord that I had, I was only able to make 3 rows of square knots. The next step is to measure the length of the knot pattern you had just made. And we're just going to reference this length as X. Then we're going to take the length of the estimated piece that you're going to make and divide it by X to get Y. So Y would be equivalent to the swatch size multiplied by the Y to get to your estimated length of your whole macrame project. The final step to get to the amount of cord you need to measure and cut is to take the Z in step 1 and measure that length by Y to get to the amount of cord you'll need to measure and cut for your project.
So be sure to always add a little bit more length before you cut the cord to prevent you from running out. You can always use the scraps for other smaller projects, but it is definitely a challenge if you run out of cord and where you might run into a situation where you can't fix it and you'll have to start over. And so to prevent that from happening, always err on the side of caution and add a little bit more when you're cutting and measuring cord. I hope you guys enjoyed today's Q&A session. Let me know if you guys have any other questions you'd like me to answer by posting in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time.